Al Jazeera, 24th of October 2023, why does China unlawfully assert its claims to the South China Sea? China is a bully that will keep taking until it is subdued and forced back to its rightful place. As tensions between China and the Philippines in the disputed areas rise, the South China Sea dispute has returned to the forefront of international attention. The year's most significant event occurred on Sunday when two near crashes occurred on Second Thomas Shoal, located within Manila's exclusive economic zone, EEZ. Beijing's so-called 9-dash line, which it once more included in a new version of its national map earlier this year, gives it claims over the Second Thomas Shoal and nearly the whole sea. Southeast Asian nations, such as Vietnam, the Philippines, and Malaysia, who all claim the waters closest to their coasts, were offended by the map. Beijing has disregarded the 2016 ruling by an international tribunal that the map did not give China any legal justification for its claim, and it is still adamant about the line's legitimacy. World powers like China employ representational media, such as national maps, to justify their exceptionalism, according to the Sydney-based Lowy Institute. According to the research tank, Beijing can express its maritime territorialization through the map. You need this information to understand the long-running maritime dispute and the famed 9-dash line. Waters from history. From a Chinese perspective, the 9-dash line symbolizes China's centuries-old claim to the South China Sea. The history of South China Sea voyages dates back to the Han Dynasty in the 2nd century when emperors dispatched explorers and officials to discover new territories in Asia. China claimed that by the Song period, it was identifying and claiming islands in the island chains it called Xiaxia, the Paracel Islands, and Nansha, the Spratly Islands. Additionally, trade led Chinese explorers, most notably Admiral Zheng He of the Ming Dynasty, into maritime Southeast Asia, where they discovered Indonesia, Borneo, and the Malay Peninsula. Beijing is adamant that its historical records demonstrate that then dominant Chinese dynasties had centuries of almost complete dominance over the waters. However, China's claims to maritime Southeast Asia were questioned by the entry of Western explorers and the development of the Vietnamese Nguyen dynasty in the 19th century. Line with 11 dashes. Beginning in the 16th century, European settlers in Southeast Asia were drawn by the lucrative spice trade. The British, Dutch, and French also started to colonize the area after the Portuguese founded a colony at Malacca on the Malayan Peninsula. These colonies were formed there and continued until World War II and, in some instances, beyond. Japan, a militarized nation that had seized control of the Korean peninsula in the early 20th century, also held power over numerous towns in China. By 1942, the Japanese had driven the Europeans out of Southeast Asia and had taken control of numerous nations bordering the South China Sea, both on land and at sea. The then nationalist government of China, also known as the Republic of China, took advantage of the opportunity to assert its claim to the waters after Japan submitted it 3 years later. In 1947, the country released a national map of China, including an 11-dash claim to the South China Sea. While the nationalists and the quickly expanding Communist Party were engaged in a civil war, geological scientists started listing the treasures China's ocean riches were believed to be. The 2 additional dashes showed Vietnam's Gulf of Tonkin on the map. Beijing altered the national map after the Communists won the Civil War, ostensibly renouncing its claim to the Gulf and the 2 lines denoting the seas because of its comradeship with the Communist North Vietnam. In 2005, Taiwan, whose nationalist government had established an administration after losing to the Communists, renounced its claims to those ancient seas. Contemporary disputes. On the Chinese national map, a U-shaped, tongue-like line extended deep into the South China Sea, symbolizing China's claimed territorial claims over areas that can be hundreds of kilometers offshore. The other countries that claim parts of the sea and reject the 9-dash line argue the Chinese claim encroaches onto their territory as defined by the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS. Each nation is granted an exclusive economic zone, EEZ, that extends 200 nautical miles, or roughly 370 kilometers, from its coast and over which it possesses sovereign powers. Although a tentative code of conduct was agreed upon in 2002, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, has been working to finalize a code of conduct to ease tensions over maritime claims. However, little has changed in this regard. China has added increasingly apparent markers of its claim to the map in the last 20 years, such as buildings on rocks and islets and expanding its military installations on these artificial outposts. Additionally, it has used ships from its fishing fleets, Coast Guard, and marine militia to support its claims. What makes the South China Sea so alluring? Southeast Asian countries were finding potentially rich oil and gas deposits by the late 1970s, and the South China Sea had emerged as one of the most critical global commerce routes. The sea's estimated 11 billion barrels of untapped oil and 190 trillion cubic feet of natural gas have antagonized competing claimants Brunei, Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Taiwan, and Vietnam, the Council on Foreign Relations states. UNCLOS was agreed upon in 1982 and signed by China in addition to the South China Sea's neighboring countries. Beijing, however, persisted in claiming sovereignty even after signing the law. For example, in the UN's archival landnotes, on June 12, 1985, the Secretary-General received from the Government of China the following communication: the so-called Colonial Islands are part of the Nansha, Spratly, Islands, which have always been Chinese territory. The Nansha Islands and the nearby waters and resources are unquestionably within Chinese jurisdiction, the Chinese government has often said. It's usually accomplished more than just diplomatic notes. China seized control of Johnson South Reef and the Spratly Islands in the southeast quadrant of the South China Sea and much of the Paracel Islands in the northern SCS, South China Sea, both located in Vietnam's Exclusive Economic Zone, EEZ, according to a report from the U.S. Department of Defense. Since then, disputes have persisted between China and other claimant nations, with many accusing Beijing of forcibly invading their EEZs. In 2012, Beijing grabbed control of Scarborough Shoal within the Philippines Seas after a months-long confrontation involving paramilitary ships. The two were at odds over the reef again in October when the Philippines pulled down a Chinese line of buoys impeding its fishermen from carrying out their jobs. Before the incident, Beijing and Manila had multiple run-ins off Second Thomas Shoal, located more than 1,000 kilometers from China's nearest major landmass, Hainan Island. It was here that the Philippines grounded the Sierra Madre in 1999. China's Coast Guard fired water cannons at Filipino vessels attempting to replenish those stationed atop the Sierra Madre in August, prompting the Philippines to accuse China of engaging in dangerous maneuvers. It said China was aiming a military-grade laser at the ships earlier this year. China asserts that land reclamation on the rocks and reefs in the waterways gives rise to maritime entitlements. Governments are permitted to construct artificial islands within their own seas, but according to UNCLOS, these areas do not possess the status of islands. They do not own a territorial sea, and their existence has no bearing on the boundaries of the Exclusive Economic Zone, the continental shelf, or the territorial sea. Award from arbitration. Following the conflict in Scarborough Shoal, the Philippines filed an arbitration case against China at The Hague's Permanent Court of Arbitration. UNCLOS superseded any historic rights or other sovereign rights or jurisdiction over the limits imposed therein, the court said after ruling in favor of the Philippines. That is to say, China's broad assertions had no basis in the 9-dash line. Still, not much has been done by the ruling to restrain Beijing. In the disputed waters, it has persisted in constructing islands and sending coast guards, fishing vessels, and marine militias. Beijing showed no remorse after the most recent confrontation over the Scarborough Shoal buoys. Wang Wenbin, a spokeswoman for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, warned against inciting or stirring up problems after referring to the shoal as Huangyan Island in Chinese. Given its increasing assertiveness and unyielding stance, it isn't easy to imagine Beijing straying from the 9-dash line very soon.